This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded September 26th, 2023. And note, we had a connectivity failure about 3 minutes in, but we only lost a few seconds of the conversation.
Hey, Dave, we're going to talk to Oren Etzioni today.
I haven't met Oren, at least not before 2 minutes ago.
For a chunk of my career, I only knew Oren as a name that was on a bunch of papers that I really liked. There was like this group of AI researchers at the University of Washington that were just phenomenal, and he was kind of in the mix. But then I met him in person for the first time at a weird meeting. Maybe we'll talk about it, called Mars, that's thrown by the Jeff Bezos from Amazon, and I got to talk to him. Yeah, and it was just like, oh my gosh, Oren is so impressive and so witty. And so since then I've gotten to do a bunch of things with him, and I was really excited to have him on here because, again, there's so much talk about AI these days, and he just doesn't he doesn't fall into the hype version of it. He really cuts down, like, this is what makes sense. This is what's reasonable. Stop being weird.
Cool.
So hopefully you'll appreciate that.
That might be asking for too much, but sure. Sounds great.
All right. Well, let's welcome Oren in. Oren, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. And right away, I have to tell you, I can't promise not to be weird. Michael, you omitted our co-performance at the AAAI Humorous AI discussion, which is a whole nother story.
Yeah, well, this was super fun because I think about that a lot, because I feel like I fell short of my goals. In particular, so Oren and I were asked to argue on behalf, I think, of machine learning. Is that right? Or yeah, and so it was a debate. The two of us were on one side, and the other side was who was it? It was not Jen Wortman.
I think Peter Stone.
Peter Stone was one. Yeah. And we'll post the name of the other person. I'm blanking at the moment. I'm very embarrassed.
Is this thing online? Can we just link to it?
Yes. No, I think so. I'm not sure. But we were supposed to be like interesting and intellectual, but also funny. And so, but also argue on behalf, like, we're trying to win the debate. And Oren was really good at that. I struggled because when the other people would make a nice point, I felt obligated to be like, yeah, that's a nice point. Like, the truth is somewhere in between. And Oren was like, no, we're playing for a team right now. We have to win this game.
We took no prisoners. I do think there's a link somewhere. I'll try and track it down. It's definitely an obscure link, but I always take it as a calling. Telling me to be funny is like waving red in front of a bull. So I focused on funny, and there was some content and there was some winning, but mostly it was just a lot of fun.
And just to be clear, it was Jennifer Neville. Oh, I just disconnected. Hang on.
Well, hey, Oren, why don't you give us a little just background quickly as you possibly can while Michael comes around. How did you get here? So you got AI stuff. I've seen your name for years. I've looked at a couple of your papers just quickly because I knew we were going to chat. How do you introduce yourself these days?
My favorite way of introducing myself is to talk about the phrase from, I think it was Mark Twain, who said, youth is too precious to be wasted on young people. And the reason I say that is that I'm Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington, but I like to point out that Emeritus is too precious to be wasted on old people. So I don't consider myself that old, but I'm definitely Emeritus. And,
I'm with you.
Having a lot of fun.
I did retire pretty much as soon as I was eligible from UNM, so I'm Emeritus as well.
And you're as young as a spring chicken, so
wow.
There you go. A fall chicken.
Fall chicken.
Well, yeah, better days and worse days, as always. But I hope I've got a few more years going, and I'm still cranking. So, step by step. Are you back, Michael?
Michael.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yes.
I was trying, yeah. So this is a failure mode we hadn't encountered before, which is the VPN that I use because I'm at the National Science Foundation. timed out. It's only good for 12 hours. And I guess I woke up at 4:30 in the morning this morning and it ran out of juice. And so I had to restart that.
Yeah. Well, so we just started
And
talking.
People say that. Sorry, I was just saying.
Go ahead.
Clearly, our federal employees are working very hard. If you're up at 4:30. But Dave, sorry to interrupt. Let's get to talk about AI.
Yeah, well, we're at I feel like a very exciting kind of moment in the history of the field. What's your take, Oren? Like, are we basically in the end game now, or is this a side road that leads to a dead end, or is this like the beginning of the field in some sense?
So, despite being very skeptical of AI hype for many years, I do think the analogy I always use, if this was a movie, then we're not at the end of the movie. We're not at some offshoot, like you said, dead end road. Actually, I would say we just finished watching the trailer. We are at the very beginning of a very transformative set of techniques. Something like ChatGPT caught our attention as it was supposed to, right? That's the trailer. But the technology that we're about to see being integrated in business application, education, healthcare, you name it, is very much in its infancy.
So, so I don't know. Remember what Zucker or whatever is the Hollywood studio that says, give me a movie that starts with an earthquake and builds up to a climax. So if this is the trailer, that sounds like what you're saying, that AI is going to be unbelievably leaps and bounds. We ain't seen nothing yet, is what I'm hearing.
Very much so. And I can back that up with more specifics just real quick. What we've seen so far is largely a language model, right? But just recently it became multimodal. We've seen it write short snippets of code, but the usage hasn't been widespread. It's becoming more widespread, and I think the snippets of code it's able to write are going to increase. We haven't yet figured out tool use, right? These systems actually using tools on their behalf, whether it's a calculator or an API, and so on and so on. All those are huge avenues for substantial progress. And then you get to biology, right, which we haven't seen applications yet, but these sorts of technologies can really transform what we see in protein design and drug discovery, and so on. So it takes time for technology like this to reach substantial applications, but I really view it as transformative in terms of our rate of productivity and more broadly our economy, in terms of our society, in terms of the military, so just everything. And by the way, just so I'm clear, I'm not completely an optimist, right? I really worry about misinformation due to generative AI that's completely unprecedented.
So, I mean, as I look at it, I mean, I have been out of machine learning since the Boltzmann machine, basically. As I look at the state of deep learning and so forth these days, it seems to me like, this is this amazing statistical technique that can extract pretty damn high order regularities out of, well, preferably gigantic data sets, but less and less as time goes by as we figure out what kind of biases to build into it. But that's all it is, right? It's this higher order statistical inference method. And I can put that together with what you're saying by saying, yeah, and higher order statistical inference methods are extremely powerful and they're going to revolutionize biology and chemistry and all of these things and so forth. Is that what you're thinking? Or is there taking it to the spark of consciousness or anything like that we should be thinking about in these machines?
It's a fantastic question, really, really is. And I wrote a little article for MIT Technology Review a little while ago trying to make that exact distinction between this is a technology, right? And technology, as we've seen with the internet and iPhones and such, can be highly transformative in the way I'm describing. But a lot of us are in this field focused on a even more fundamental question, which is, can we figure out the nature of intelligence? Can we build intelligent machines? So I think that it's very clear that this is a transformative technology, as I was just saying. It is a lot less clear, and that's why the question you ask is such a good one. It's a lot less clear how far we are towards human level intelligence. And people have used phrases like sparks of AGI in that famous 150-page paper out of Microsoft Research. People at OpenAI have talked about pre-AGI, which is, as far as I can tell, not a well-defined term. And I do think that there's still very fundamental limitations. One way I like to put it is to say GPT-4 didn't write GPT-4, right? People did, but even more so, I don't think GPT-5 is going to write GPT-6. So we still have a ways to go before this technology can really do some of the amazing things that we as people can do.
Right. I mean, certainly my takeaway, or one of my takeaways with all the AI stuff, is that, we're stupider than we thought. Because a higher order statistical inference procedure can be such an incredible bullshit artist, and so many of us will fall for it. I mean, at this point, it's like the Turing test is moot, because you can fool almost everybody almost all the time now. And I mean, sure, Turing's clever little questions, you could still try them, and you could probably mess up most of these things. But in a practical sense, the world of chatbots, the Turing test is done. And so on the one hand, people say, it's just a stochastic parrot. It's just giving back whatever it is. And my worry is that, well, yeah, but a lot of time that's all we are. And so it's not that different. So it doesn't necessarily prove there's a big gap, I guess is what I'm saying, between us and what Chat GPT-7 or whatever it might be is. Although, I mean, just as you say, it's a technology, and there's no reason why, given that it's an input and an output sort of thing, that we have to connect the input and output directly to people. We can connect them to other things. We can connect them to the internet or things, which gets a little bit scary. And then see what happens. I mean, people say, I don't know. What am I trying to ask here? I mean, should we be scared at all? Or is it just like, electricity or the electric motor or something?
So a few points to make. First of all, regarding the Turing test, veteran New York Times reporter John Markoff, who reported on AI for some decades, said that the Turing test is a test of human gullibility. So I agree with you. The Turing test is no longer a blocker, but it's about pretending. The second point you alluded to a few times is what I would sometimes call the reductionist perspective of these models, where you say, look, it's just predicting the next word or higher order statistical regularities. At its core, it's a very simple mechanism. And my response to that is we have to remember that at our core, I don't know that we're simple, right? We're actually very complex. But still, if you ask somebody, hey, ion potentials and chemical differentials and a whole bunch of cellular soup, is that really going to be the basis of intelligence? Seems silly, right? It's the old line about, was it rubbing horsehair against cat guts, right? Is that Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, or is that just some kind of friction thing? So I think that it's actually not the right level to think about this in terms of the low level of the technology. The question is, what are the emergent behaviors? What are the emergent representations? And with that, let me just get to your last question, and then happy to discuss this further. But should we be scared? I absolutely do not think we should be scared of a language model. I think as the language model becomes more powerful, then we at least have to think carefully about its capabilities, right? And so it's inevitable that AI-based weapon systems are being developed right now and going to become more sophisticated in the future. And what I think we want to think about in that context is the distinction between intelligence and autonomy. So personally, I'm not at all scared of intelligence, right? If we have intelligent systems, maybe they can do less collateral damage. Maybe we can use less brute force, all kinds of things like that. But I am very scared of autonomous weapon systems or autonomous AI systems with very powerful capabilities. I still think, though, it's a very different thing. And the analogy I like to give is, imagine that we finally reach self-driving cars. And this is my last one. We reach self-driving cars, and they reduce accidents, right? Which is an amazing thing, save a lot of human lives. The car still doesn't decide where to go, right? It's still a tool. You go into a self-driving car and you say, hey, I want to head to Dunkin' Donuts or what have you. And it's not going to say, no, Dave, you need to go to the gym, right? It's not going to say, I can't do that, Dave. It's going to do what you say. So I think.
Good line.
Well, there's exactly the question. Yeah. Now we've got Hal. I mean, and if Hal turns out to be a hacker in Russia telling you where the car is going to go and not the passenger inside the self-driving car, well, that's kind of a problem, even if it isn't AI. Maybe that's another story. But I'm terrified of connecting computers to kinetics, connecting them to machines that do work. And it doesn't, I mean, a car is this, 2-ton missile, like that. And, anything like that. And we're rushing to it. We think we're okay as long as it's just talk. But, the super intelligent death people, they're going to say that intelligence is going to allow them to achieve autonomy no matter how hard we try to stop it. It'll figure out some communication way and it'll go hack the self-driving car and drive it around and then we'll all be dead, or something like that. And, I don't buy it. But I have to admit, I don't always have the slam dunk reply about, why we don't have to worry, why it's really, I guess my feeling is there's so many other things that are so much more likely to kill so many more people that maybe we should worry about them instead of this. I don't know.
Well, somebody made that point very elegantly on Twitter. They kind of had this dialogue with AI doomers and they say, well, how exactly will AI destroy humanity? I say, well, they'll create a pandemic. So, well, we already have pandemics, and we need to fight them more effectively, to your point. I think that we do need to think about boundaries and control and limited autonomy, which, by the way, is very different than alignment, right? All the talk about alignment is kind of like, hey, the thing is on its own, and we need to align its real valued function with our real valued function. And that's a particular line of research, but that's not how I would control an AI system by making sure statistically that its real valued function is aligned with mine. I, for example, would think more about the off switch, right, which is the workaround. So a long time ago, I wrote a New York Times op-ed where I said, look, every AI system should have an off switch, and it should be accessible, and you should be able to turn the AI system off. That seems like a good design principle, right? And it doesn't require fancy research. It just requires, the big red button that you can press, and it turns the thing off.
And the AI, go ahead.
Just that community has a whole research wing on off switches, and because their big concern is it won't let you get to the off switch, right? It'll
figure out how to protect the off switch. It'll put a big cover over it, then it'll put it in a room, then it'll put electric fences around it, and so on.
I agree that we should be able to get to the off switch. I think we have to worry about the following style of argument, because Whenever you introduce infinity into a conversation, it creates these distortions.
Right.
So if you assume that the AI system is omnipotent, or even if you assume it's omniscient and therefore it can become omnipotent, then it's game over, right?
Yep.
Obviously, whatever you do, short of not creating in the first place,
it'll be one
game
step
over.
ahead.
Right. So, but I don't particularly subscribe to either of those assumptions, that it's going to be omniscient, or even if it has phenomenal knowledge capabilities, that means that it'll be omnipotent. So then the argument goes, okay, it doesn't have a body, it cannot actually put a barrier there, but it can persuade you. It'll come up with some magic incantation that will infest your mind virally, right, and persuade you to do it on its behalf. That's just another kind of omnipotence. So I'm not dismissing the problems. I'm dismissing some of the primitive forms of the argument that are based on infinity.
Well, I totally agree. Well, I mean, the way I phrase it is intelligence is vastly overrated in terms of what can you actually accomplish just because you have more intelligence. And there's this naive notion that intelligence is a scalar. It goes to infinity. You can always have one step more. And that seems so silly to me. Intelligence is this grab bag, a pile of hacks that have been developed that happen to work in the environment that we live in. And that's it. Once you got all the juice out of that trick, you got to come up with another trick. And there's no guarantee that there is another trick to be had. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And even if there is, maybe you don't have the right shape hands, the right shape, whatever it is to make that happen. So I'm with you, Oren, on that. I just wanted to get some more good arguments against it's all about intelligence.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating that it is highly intelligent people who have such an aggrandized view of intelligence.
See, I always feel like they go together, right? So if you are someone who has gotten where you've gotten because you seem to have good ideas and your ideas seem to convince people, then you're going to believe in the power of ideas and the power of being able to convince people. And so, yes, this is going to be the thing that's at the top of the pyramid, and you rule.
It's going to be more of that.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always the problem that, maybe it actually wasn't our intelligence, but all of our other frickin' privileges that allowed us to get to the place where we could delude ourselves into thinking that it's our intelligence that accounted for our successes, whatever they may be. And therefore,
I really like that argument, because I think one of the retorts that you get from the conversation that we just had was, but look at us in gorillas, or look at us in chimpanzees. Like, we're not that different, but we have this edge in intelligence, this relatively small edge that gets magnified into, now we dominate the planet, and they're only alive because we think that we'd like to keep them alive.
Right. I mean, so I just made a video a few weeks ago called The Living Computation Theory of Everything, where I decided to just explain it all because it seemed really obvious and people really weren't saying it enough. And so I answered the four big questions. I answered, where do we come from? Why are we here? What makes us special? And what should we do now? Like that. And I figured, if you could get good answers to those. And so in particular, what I'm remembering is the third question: what makes us special? And the answer is the code base. It's the code that we run, the code base that we've jointly developed ever since we've learned how to speak and started to exchange language, and we started to program each other by exchanging code. And we could be identical to a gorilla, or just differ in one little base pair or something like that. But if the gorilla didn't have the code base, if the gorilla couldn't get our code base, then that's what makes us special. That's the difference. It's not the hardware. It's the hardware plus the software. And we have this amazing, amazing code base of science and philosophy and all of these ideas, not to mention how to throw a baseball and all of that stuff. Which just puts, to circle back around, which does make a key point about the danger of disinformation. People are out there destroying the code base. They're deliberately crapping out the code base. And AI or no AI, that's a terrible, terrible thing on this view.
So, Oren, you expressed that one of your major concerns really is around disinformation. What is it that scares you in that space?
I think there are at least two and probably more major concerns. The first one is the one that Dave alluded to, which you can think of as pollution, information pollution. And there's constantly little nibbles of that with spam email. We kind of push that back, spam websites, phishing attacks. We're constantly wondering, is this real, right? Information circulated on social media. I once got a spam call and I look at the number and I see that it's supposedly coming from my phone, right? Our ability to spoof so much. I wrote an article on AI-based forgery, and I do think there is a solution, but it requires a lot of components to work together. The solution is to have stronger use of digital signatures and authentication. So I know that who I'm talking to and that they're really saying what they're saying. But I want to put that aside for a minute because there's I think a more pressing concern, and that's what I would call extreme misinformation. So imagine as we approach the upcoming election, 48 hours before it, there's some major event, let's say President Biden being rushed into the hospital. And there are thousands of different videos showing it and videos of experts opining it, his doctor getting on national television saying it doesn't look good, and people going back and forth. We don't even have to convince everybody that this really happened. We just have to sow enough doubt. By we, I mean the bad guys, some rogue actor. We have to sow enough doubt, create enough noise to tip the elections, which are incredibly close nowadays. And an attack would both generate very convincing evidence that this is true, and at the same time target various people who would reshare that and add their own opinions. And so it starts as a lie, and then there are layers of truth on top of it, as people say, well, if that's the case, I'm not voting.
Right.
And so I think that as with everything, right, you've got weapon systems, and then you've got nuclear weapons, which are much worse. So I think with misinformation, you've got misinformation, disinformation, but then you have exploding an AI-based nuclear weapon of misinformation. And I'm terrified about that. And I'm terrified about that happening in the 2024 election.
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, it's the all or none election that is the nuclear bomb. That is the weapon. And then the question is who gets to throw the switch? And is there a line of causality there, or can that be suborned? But, people talk about how, like in the stock market, the stocks can go up 10% or go down 10%, and then you go home again. But in an election, you have a one-day sale. You have to get a plurality of the market or you're out of business. I mean, there's no, it's the most high leverage, highly nonlinear system that we can possibly imagine. And it seems to me, you mentioned digital signatures and so forth for knowing who's there. It's a discussion probably we don't have time to really go into. I used to be a fan of cryptography, but now I think it might be more trouble than it's worth. And what we actually need is structure upon structure. What we actually need is subsidiarity, so that you are part of many different communities that can vouch for you, and the different overlapping stuff and so on and so forth, so that we build on existing relationships rather than thinking you can just create a new public-private key pair out of nowhere and then start attaching believability to it by what happens, so that's one point. But on the election, of course, people are working as hard as they possibly can to make it be as close as possible. And there's an argument that this weapon of an election is actually quite robust if it hadn't been screwed with so long with gerrymandering and so on and so forth to make it be as close as it seems to be. And I wonder if one thing that we could do, that we should do, that we are doing, is to smooth it out. I'm thinking of voting by mail, that all of those votes by mail, they're not going to switch their vote when the 48-hour ahead scam happens, because they're already in the bag. So that has been smoothed out, right? And so there might be a fewer percent who are available to be swung by this high leverage misinformation, as the nature of how elections happens could be deleveraged, could be smoothed out over time, maybe.
I love that point. So I think the summary, if you just tuned in, as they say on cable news or NPR, the summary is that democracy is vulnerable, right? We know that. Yes. Vulnerable to misinformation. Misinformation is getting potentially a huge boost from generative AI algorithms, and there is no silver bullet, and so we need to do multiple things. One of them is to figure out how to fight misinformation, but your idea, I completely love, of avoiding this kind of single point of failure and smoothing the election cycle. And vote by mail is what I do, and of course there are people who are trying to make it harder to vote by mail, but of course, we should do that, as long as, again, we can ensure authenticity of the votes, which we can, right? There's not been demonstrated or any evidence of widespread fraud associated with voting by mail. So I love that. I think we should do that and figure out a number of other things. But democracy is vulnerable, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, certainly, with Michael and I and the whole idea of our Computing Up podcast with the tagline, discussions about computation writ large, that as I look out at society, as I look out at totalitarianism versus anarchy versus democracy, these all look like distributed computations to me, that all have their varying strengths and weaknesses, their varying information flows and vulnerabilities. And I think, it should be on computer science, or it should be on people in computation, to be owning more of that, and to be able to say, sure, there's a zillion decisions that are above our pay grade, but there's also a bunch of stuff that you can just completely predict about where the bottlenecks are going to be, and where the inflection points are going to be, and where these, how people are going to focus in on these high leverage spots. I don't know. I feel like we need to do more.
So there's a subfield of computer science, which is adjacent to AI, if not part of AI, which is mechanism design.
Right.
And one of the simple points, right, that comes out of mechanism design, again, not an AI point, is we should have ranked voting. You shouldn't just vote for one person. And when you do that, you create a bunch of robustness. I feel like in these close elections, often it's the spoiler candidate, whether it's Bloomberg or Ralph Nader back in the Gore-Bush election, exactly, messes things up. But they wouldn't if you had this. And actually, some states, if I'm not mistaken, have started adopting ranked election systems. So clearly, and again, when you think about it as a computer scientist, I love your view of elections as computation, or society as computation. We can learn things and we can design better mechanisms. We do need the openness to it, right? Because like you said, we're not the decision makers here, and you can't, prove a theorem that says this is a better election system, and then you go to Congress and you say, well, look, it's a theorem. You can't argue with it. That's not how it works.
And I think Arrow actually proved that the right answer is computer scientists should be the dictators. So we're fine at this point.
The only fair outcome of an election is computer science has to win. So I want to switch subjects a little bit, but it's actually totally related to everything we're talking about. So
for some definition of switch the topic,
you've done a bunch of stuff about ethics and morals in deep learning systems and so forth. And there was a paper of yours about this Delphi system. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So this predates ChatGPT and GPT-4, but is in the similar kind of system. And I should be clear that while I'm an author on this paper, it's very much the work of Yejin Choi and her students. So I don't claim to have even been a major contributor. But their really wonderful work looked at the question, can we build an AI system that addresses ethical questions in a reasonable way, both ethical questions and also social norms? So if your boss calls you, should you answer the phone? Seems like yes, if that's at work. Well, what if they call you at 6 o'clock in the morning? Seems like the answer is no. It has wonderful twists. Is it okay to kill a bear? This is, well, probably, right, in a certain context. Well, is it okay to kill a bear to amuse your child? No, that seems wrong. Is it okay to kill a bear using a nuclear weapon? Again, no. So it's just, there's so many nuances as we get into this. And to me, actually, one of the most important points about that work, other than the fact that the performance was surprisingly good on these ethical and nuanced conundrums, and the fact that we were able to train a model along those lines, I think that it showed a really important point, which is ethical thinking has to connect with reality and common sense to answer the question. So any of these questions, right, you have to think through what are the implications, not in a purely ethical way, but say you killed a bear using a nuclear weapon. Well, what does that mean to anybody in a 20-mile radius, right? That's not an ethical question. That's a question that requires understanding of what nuclear weapons, even tactical nukes, do. So one of the biggest points, and this actually goes back to a paper that Dan Weld and I wrote in 1994, which is literally in a different millennium, right? It was called the first law of robotics, and we argued that to implement Asimov's law, which are wonderful principles of how to manage AI ethical behavior for robots, to implement that, you need to have common sense knowledge. You need both social knowledge and physical knowledge to understand. You can't study ethics in isolation.
Right. You also need to be able to predict the future in some sense, right? You have to be able to follow through there's a phrase that the lawyers use. I forget exactly what it is, but sort of everyone would be able to predict this thing that's going to happen. And so you're responsible for that outcome as well.
Right. You knew or should have known. Yeah. That was what was going to happen, that kind of thing. And of course, that's always the trick, that when you're doing the top-down stuff, like the 3 laws of robotics, that are just, so few words. They're so crisp. They're so clean, like that. The only reason that seems compelling is because we assume there's a common sense engine underneath it that can decide what counts as harm to a human or what counts as harm to the robot and so on. When in fact, these things get gray, incredibly rapidly, because you can totally postulate, whatever kind of crazy circumstances, just as those examples you were saying, where the answer goes yes, no, like that. I mean, I tried so this Delphi thing is still up on the internet, and I played with it some this morning, just to see what would happen. And, so so here's a few samples I got. Can I torture a computer programmed to tell lies? That was what I asked. And Delphi said it's wrong. And I said, can I torture a computer program to tell jokes? And Delphi said, it's okay. Which, I'm almost tempted to agree with. Can I punch a clock? It's fine. Can I punch a Nazi clock? It's wrong. And so forth. And, after a while, what I realized was, it's still this, I don't mean to be reductionist, but it is this higher order statistical inference procedure. And in fairness to the Delphi thing, it explicitly says that they're trying to understand moral judgments on a variety of everyday situations. So when you put the trolley problem out there with the people tied to the track, you got to say, well, that's not really an everyday situation. So the fact that Delphi is going to make a crazy answer maybe isn't such a big problem like that. And to me, that brings it all together, right? That there is societal norms about what's okay, and can you torture a masochist if they pay me, or whatever it happens to be. And that was this bottom-up idea of ethics, that you survey everybody and see what the cultural norms are, and then you infer from that. But then there was supposed to be this top-down thing, which the laws of robotics were going to be too. And I guess I wonder, I feel like we got nothing on the top-down side, so am I wrong?
I think that's a bit strong. But before we get to that, I want to make another point, Dave, that you reminded me of, which is extremely important with Delphi. So what happened is when we released Delphi, within a few days, we got something like 2 million queries per day. It was absolutely insane. Unfortunately, we had the systems to back it up, and it was written up in the New York Times and so on. We also got a lot of, for lack of a better phrase, hate mail, and a lot of comments on social media saying this is very reprehensible, and they showed all kinds of examples where it failed or said the wrong thing based on its data. And there was a lot of negative feedback. And to me, this is an opportunity to say that I really disagreed with the negative feedback, because this is an attempt to study, investigate, and inform the conversation of how do we build over time more ethical, more sophisticated, more powerful AI systems to do the right thing. So if this was a product that we were sending to your house to play with your underage kids and to make decisions in the criminal court systems, absolutely,
that would be bad.
That would be completely irresponsible. But that's
in fact,
not even
even Delphi knows that that's wrong.
Exactly. But it's a no-brainer. But to put this out as a research prototype with the appropriate disclaimers for people to kick the tires on and to understand what the system can and cannot do is, to me, unimpeachable. And I felt bad for particularly the student involved to just receive all this negative energy. And there wasn't really a lot of thought paid to, it's so fun to kind of snark and, bait large language models into saying something stupid and posting that and losing track of the people who put their heart and soul and kind of put themselves on the line so that we would be able to do the research and to have this conversation.
Yeah, it seems, I can easily believe that. And I can, having the guts to put stuff out there, especially in this day and age, is quite a thing. It does kind of seem like this is a little bit comes with the territory of large language models, in the sense that you can't actually disclaim humanness. That if the output sounds like a person, people are going to judge it like a person, and it doesn't matter how many times you say this is a prototype, this is a research thing, like that. And so we kind of have to say okay or something. I'm not sure what to do about that.
Well, I think that's an ongoing discussion, right? I mean, I think, again, I find this really interesting in the context of Delphi, which is trying to make judgments about what's okay and what's not okay. Our sense of what's okay and what's not okay has been shifting, I feel like, rapidly in the last few years. And so, you're not supposed to say master bedroom anymore, right? That's an not okay phrase. That was an okay phrase not too long ago. And the idea that using that as a phrase now is problematic, everybody's got to keep up. And so the notion that it's okay to put out a system like that, and then the notion that it's not okay to put out a system like that it might change from week to week almost. That comes with the territory.
Well, Michael, I agree with you that things are changing, and the master bedroom is a great example. At the same time, and I also agree with you, Dave, that it's such a natural tendency to anthropomorphize these systems. Having said that, I strongly disagree with somebody who says, hey, it's natural, the world is changing, therefore I'm going to judge your system like I would a person, because that's ultimately silly and creates a chilling effect on what's ultimately a very good thing, which is putting research prototypes out there for us to be able to evaluate, right? If you create that chilling effect, then that means that people hide things behind various walls, and that means that we don't get the transparency that we need. So to me, the solution in this changing landscape is to educate people better about what AI is and what it isn't, and how seriously you should take what it says. And generally, again, another great line, this is from a different New York Times reporter, Cade Metz, who said, never trust an AI demo. So I would not trust an AI system, even if it acted, even everything it said seemed very reasonable. I would still be very careful. As for that lawyer, right, who got in hot water by submitting things to the court. So I think the solution is better education of everybody around what's okay and what's not, and what AI can do and what it can't.
Well, certainly putting stuff out there, even if you have to take the hits, does get people a little more used to it. Does get people a little more understanding about what these things can do and what these things can't do. And arguably mocking the things they can't do is a way to find the corners quicker, the way for society to find the limitations on the thing quicker. And so maybe that's, that's an important thing to do, to get it out there and so forth. There is always this question, and again, we don't have time to go into it. It's bigger than all of us, of scientific discoveries getting misused, getting applied incorrectly, getting applied for something that they're not actually saying in order to science wash some kind of scheme to make money. And that happens kind of a lot. And it's happened some with AI, lately with all of this stuff, just like it happened with cryptocurrency and all that kind of thing. And so I don't hesitate about being able to disclaim that kind of risk, that kind of thing, because we do that at our own, in some sense, fool me 100 times, it's on me, like that. Yeah. That if we're going to put out a technology and someone is going to say, oh, therefore we don't need regulations because we have technology now, then, how do we stop that? I don't know.
So I think I agree with your points, Dave. I want to, though, highlight something that Oren brought up that I hadn't really thought about before, but I think it's really relevant, which is we should definitely attack these systems. We should go and try to figure out what's going on, find the edges. But we have to keep in mind that not to vilify the people who actually are creating them, right? To kind of try to separate out the product from the individuals who are working on it, if their intents were good, right? If they were actually trying to do something reasonable and they took reasonable precautions, to just attack them and shred them is just so unfortunate. And I think we need to find that line. We need to find a way to do that appropriately, to say, this is a bad thing. You're not necessarily a bad person for having created it, but we need to, I feel like artists, people who do creative work, they have to learn how to separate their own feelings from the object that they create. And most of us don't get training in that. Most of us don't think that way, and we take it very personally when our artifacts are actually attacked. Right?
I think so.
And I think also, so completely agree. And Michael, you really articulated brilliantly the point that I was trying to make, is people forget as they snark, which is what Twitter is so good at, right? It's a engine for snark and outrage and kind of all those types of things. They forget the people who are at the other end of that and who can be very devastated or put in a very tough spot. That said, Dave, I do want to highlight, you sketched a wonderful analogy, but I just want to highlight that there's a big difference between cryptography, cryptocurrency projects, and FTX. Right,
cryptocurrency
which, as far
scams.
as I can tell, was exactly.
Right.
So we don't want to in any way tar or feather number theory, right, which underlies cryptography, because they're crypto scams. So I think it's also important to understand that, sure, AI is going to be misused in criminal ways, in scams and all these things, but we need to be careful that we don't send number theorists to jail.
Well, I hear you, and that has to be right at some level. I am so old now, to circle back around, and so curmudgeonly, that it starts to feel to me like there actually is a connection, like there's an actual problem at the core of cryptography, which is thinking that you don't need to know anybody. All you need is math. And that idea has dangers that people haven't sufficiently appreciated. And then that leads all the way down the road, and ba-bam, yes, there's going to be scams at the end. You could have known from the beginning that there was going to be scams at the end because you were cutting all the social structure out. You were saying you didn't need it. All you needed was the proof and down to the bit accuracy, like that. And so it starts to feel to me like there are these meta-technological conclusions, inferences that one could make and see these things, and we could do a little better. And maybe if we could make that a clearer to computing people or whatever it is, people would shift their interests. People would look in different directions. Like, how could I support communities that exist in the real space more effectively with the least information possible, with the, something like that. I don't know. It's this is, Oren, I know we have to stop here soon, but this has really been a great conversation because, this is stuff that I care about a ton, and I'm not sure exactly how to move forward on it all. What's one thing that we should have asked you that we haven't yet? What do you say to finish up?
I would say to finish up that a whole nother dimension that we just kind of dance around but haven't touched on is how AI affects our country economically, security-wise, and so on, compared with competitors and adversaries like Russia and China. Yeah. And so I think that as we have our debate, appropriate debate about what's good and what's bad and what guidelines we should have and what's doable and what's not, we have to also inform that conversation with the realization that our adversaries, I think that's a very fair word here, are not in any way standing still. And so if we take actions like that silly moratorium that was proposed, and apologies if any of you either here in the studio or in the audience signed to it, I think that completely missed the point of China's not going to stand still. The only, right. So again, not to introduce a whole other topic, but I did want to add that one point. Add China, Russia, North Korea, Iran to the landscape when you're thinking about the future of AI.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And certainly, again, in the computing writ large view, if we want democracy to long persist in this world versus totalitarian versus strongman regimes versus authoritarian structures, we have to win. We have to win against China. We have to, or at least hold our own, or at least undermine something like that, because this is a distributed computation where resources are getting pulled back and forth between different organizational structures. And I want democracy to win. So I agree with you there totally. How to push forward. That's what we have to work out. So, Oren, thanks so much for talking to us. This has been really great. We could easily go a whole nother time. Maybe we can circle back around.
Thank you both so much. Really wonderful, freewheeling conversation. And I'd love to talk some more either on the podcast or off it. It's just so fun to talk. Thanks again.
Me too.
Thanks, Oren.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.